Okay, so today in this video I'm going to show you how to use acrylic paint, the basic technique of acrylic painting. And this technique is based on an understanding of the basic theory of painting itself. That theory though is not just theoretical, it's a very practical understanding of paint, in that it's basically an understanding of the constituent parts of paint. So to explain more about that, there are three constituent parts of paint. There's the pigment, which is usually a powder, a coloured powder, which is added to the paint. In this case, this paint that I'm using is Prussian blue light. So a particular pigment with the colour of Prussian blue light would be mixed into the paint in order to give it this particular colour or hue. Then there's the binder. The binder is also known as the vehicle or the medium. It'll be referred to any of these names in different books depending on what kind of books you're reading, or you know, if you're looking at demonstrations in different places. The binder is what gives the paint its consistency. It's what holds the paint together and gives it this kind of gloopy consistency. So as you can see, this blob of Prussian blue light that I've put onto the palette is holding its consistency at the moment. And that is due to the amount of the binder medium or vehicle that's in the paint. I'm going to refer to it as binder from here on in this demonstration. And then the last part of paint is called the solvent. The solvent is the part of the paint that allows the paint to flow. So we need a certain amount of solvent in order to allow the paint to flow. So this particular paint is an acrylic paint that it's what's known as a liquid acrylic paint that comes in a bottle. Because it's in a liquid form, it's more flowing than it would be if it were in a tube, because it has to pour out of the bottle. We don't really squeeze it out of the bottle. So it would have a little bit more of the solvent in this particular paint. So the solvent in the case of acrylic is water, and the binder, what gives the paint its particular consistency, is what we call acrylic medium. Acrylic medium is basically looks a bit like if you've ever put hair gel into the palm of your hand. It's kind of a clear gel with a thick consistency. So the binder in this case is acrylic medium and the solvent is water. And what happens is, how we understand how paint works is the meeting of the solvent and the medium, and how the medium breaks down depending on how much solvent we add to the paint. So it's a balance between how much binder and how much solvent it is actually in the paint as we apply it to the surface that we're painting. So I'm just going to show this in the case of acrylic. I'm taking this, just going to saturate this brush here. I'm just going to move these brushes. I have a piece of kitchen towel here that I can dab the brush on and remove excess solvent. There's still some water on this brush, and that's important because I don't want to apply the paint as it is there on the palette. That's quite thick and it will give us a particular effect. I'm going to take a little bit of the paint, and because there's a little bit of water in the brush, the paint will flow a little bit more than it is in this area. It's flowing a little bit more over here because of the water in the brush. And I'm just going to make a mark using that level of solvent. Then I'm going to take some more kitchen towel. I'm going to make a good wad of it over here. And I'm going to remove all of the water out of the brush. And I'm just going to take a lot of... So if I take a lot of paint on the brush, what we call loading the brush, I've got a lot of pigment and a lot of binder, but I've got very, very little solvent on this brush, so it's going to make a particular type of mark. And the mark that it's making is a bit more three-dimensional, and some people love this effect. There's nothing wrong with working like this. It's just another way of using the paint, but it's quite demonstrably different from the previous mark that we made. Now I'm going to use a lot of solvent. We're going to use three extremes: a middling, a thick paint, and then a very thin paint. So actually I've just dabbed the brush. I'm not going to do that. I'm going to resaturate the brush. I'm going to put the water into the paint and actually make a kind of puddle, so that I have, you know, basically a lot of solvent and very little binder. Now the paint is going down. It's flowing an awful lot more. I can extend the paint further, so it's going to cover a wider surface area, but it's going to lighten a little bit in value. A value is the relative darkness or lightness of the paint as it's applied to the surface. And it may become a little bit more transparent. If I add even more water, acrylic is thought of as being the most versatile paint. Some people say that it can be used thin like watercolor. It can mimic watercolor if we add enough water to it and make it very thin and transparent. And you know, you can kind of see that happening right there. And then some would say that when you use it thickly, it can almost imitate oil paint. I don't fully agree with that, but it does approach the consistency of oil paint. So there is the basics of this lesson. Depending on how much solvent you add or how little solvent you add, you can get all of these different effects with the paint. And there are obviously others in between these extremes. This basic theory of painting, the fact that there is pigment, binder and solvent, is applicable to all different types of paint. So in the case of oil paint, the pigment is exactly the same. If I had, Prussian blue light. If I had Prussian blue light oil paint, there would be Prussian blue light pigment, the very, very same as it would have been in this acrylic paint, added to the oil paint. The binder in oil paint is linseed oil. So that's why we call it oil paint. That's why it's called an oil medium. Linseed oil is what gives oil its rich, gloopy consistency. And then in order to break down the binder in oil paint, we need to use a solvent that is appropriate. So water is not going to break down linseed oil. As we know, oil and water don't mix. So what we need to use with oil paint, with linseed oil, is a solvent like turpentine or white spirits, kind of petrol-based solvents. And it works exactly the same way. That if we use white spirits, the white spirits will break down the linseed oil and allow the paint to flow more. So we can have very, very thick oil paint, we can have kind of medium thickness oil paint, we can have very, very thin oil paint, almost like a stain or something that will just stain a surface. And you know, this theory applies to, you know, other painting media such as watercolor, where the binder is gum arabic and the solvent, again like acrylic, is water. So that's basically it for today's video. Thanks.